Thank you so much, Anna. Good afternoon or morning to everybody. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'm going to stand nice and close to my laptop. But as Anna mentioned, if you have any issues with hearing me or if I'm going too fast, please feel free to drop a comment. I'll try to take us nice and slow. Hopefully everyone here is familiar with and or has a transitional housing program grant. We're going to be talking about that program grants reporting process today. Hello, and we have folks joining from all over the country, various time zones, which is why I said that funny at the beginning, but I'm located in Maine, so it's 3:30 p.m. for me. Yeah. All right. I'm sharing my screen. And so I, myself and my colleagues here, Devin and Chelsea, we work for the Office on Violence Against Women. Our agency is called the Measuring Effectiveness Initiative. We go by MEI for short, but you might have also heard of us as Muskie because we used to be located at the Muskie School of Public Service in Maine, but we have since been absorbed into the Catherine Cutler Institute at the University of Maine. So we're based out of Portland, but my colleagues and I are all in various parts of the state today. Our mission is to support OVW and OVW grantees like you with reporting on how your grant funds are used. We are not OVW and we're not just grants, but our aim is to help make sure this process of reporting goes as smoothly for you as it can. We want to be imparting skills and tools and knowledge and resources to you to make the process go as well as it can go. We also, in addition to helping operate the impact tool where you're reporting, once all of your reports are complete and OVW program managers have the opportunity to look at what you've submitted, one of the other things that we do here at VAWA MEI is to collect and analyze the data that you have submitted. We analyze data from thousands of grantees nationwide for many different types of grants, not just the Transitional Housing Program grant. The other thing we do is support folks one-on-one, which I'm saying because even though you've all logged in today for this webinar, I want to encourage you to feel free to reach out to us over the phone or by email any time of year. One of the best parts of our job is talking to grantees about how grants are going for them. We can't actually give you any guidance on how your grant funds are used, but if you need help with filling out a report or figuring out how to report something in your performance report, we are your best resource. So today we are going to be going through an overview of the reporting cycle. And this is specifically geared towards transitional housing grantees because, as you all know or may be familiar with, the form in the past has been a bear. And I'm so pleased that this is the first reporting period. I'm excited to tell you that I think this will be a lot easier for everybody. I definitely felt excited when we first launched Impact, but I do think that this newer iteration of the format for the Transitional Housing Program grant is going to be easier to navigate. So we're going to go through how to access and fill out and submit your performance report. I'll be giving you some general tips. We'll go through, I'm going to show you what the transitional housing section looks like now. And I'm going to be giving you all kinds of contact information at the end. Yeah. So some of you might be brand new to reporting this January. If you are, welcome, and hopefully this feels doable. It's definitely always going to be a lot of work to complete a performance report, but I'll reiterate this later that all of the data you submit, whether it's numerical or written narrative, every bit of your report is important and it's reviewed by many different staff, not just OVW, but my whole team will work on the data that you've submitted to compile reports for and with OVW, for lawmakers, policymakers, and it'll help inform how grant funds are allocated. So your performance report is so important. The impact tool itself is newer. We've started collecting data with the impact tool last year for discretionary grantees like Transitional Housing Program grantees. It's a web-based reporting system, which means you're not completing a fillable PDF. You're going to be accessing your performance report online through the impact tool. And at the very end of the process, you'll be able to download a PDF of your performance report, and that PDF will get submitted into your Just Grants account. The due date, which hopefully isn't going to surprise anyone here, is January 30th this month, not the 31st. Please note that. It's an odd thing, but in January, you always have 30 days after the close of a reporting period to submit your performance reports. So the performance report is due on January 30th, and it will capture all grant-funded activities that occurred between July 1st and the end of December for the year 2025. You're always reporting on the previous 6 months that just ended. Yeah. I am going to quickly show you how to get your performance report. It's hopefully going to seem really simple and clear up some confusion right away. So the first thing you're going to do is access your performance report link by going to our website. And if you've never been to our website before, I'm going to show you how to get there. It's vowamei.org, and it'll bring you right to our homepage. To find the performance report link, you're going to click Grant Programs, and they're all in alphabetical order. You can see there's a lot besides just transitional housing. So I'm going to find the Transitional Housing Program, and this specific web page we have set up has a lot of resources for you beyond just the reporting link, so feel free to poke around. So you can see the link in a few ways. There is a blurb right at the top of the page where you can click Impact Link. The deadlines are reiterated, but if you skim past all of that block of text because you're looking for something a little more link looking, the first square here is going to lead you to the performance report. Impact Link. You can see there are steps written out for how to go through this process successfully. It's really easy to skim and assume you don't need any of the directions, but I promise you, if you follow the directions, it'll go smoother for you. So you're going to click this big rectangle to bring you to the impact tool. You can see the colors look the same as our website, which is intentional, but you are successfully at the impact tool link. You can see the top up here shows you this is a Transitional Housing Program performance report link. If your agency has other grant programs, this page will look familiar, but the program grant is always unique at the top here. So I'm going to hit Start New Report to open up a performance report. A brand new one is blank. To start your own report, you would need to fill all of this out and hit Save and Continue. And that will generate a blank link for you. If I back us up just a quick minute, I also wanted to point out that there is a sample performance report if you wanted to show colleagues or partner agencies what the performance report contains. You can download a PDF of it. It's not fillable, but it does include all of the same information. There's accompanying instructions. There are other training opportunities coming up that you can sign up for. So there's lots of resources here on our website if you feel so inclined to poke around. All right, that's that piece for right now. So as I showed you, you're going to follow that link to start your own report for your grant award. You would go through and complete all relevant sections. And that is to say some sections are mandatory like filling out your grant information, where you'll indicate who the point of contact should be, their contact information, the grant award number. There are some optional sections, which would mean it's going to start by asking, did you use grant funds to do this activity? And you'll indicate yes or no. And if you indicate no, you skip the whole section. I see there's a hand raised, and I wanted to hopefully point you to the Q&A pod if you don't mind. That way everyone will be able to see and access your question. And my colleagues will be able to help if it includes a link to something. At the very end of the process, when you've completed filling out the report to capture all of your grant funded activities, you're going to go to the very end of it to finalize it and create a PDF. And you're not done until you upload your PDF into your Just Grants account. That piece is something that we cannot do for you. If you've completed your report in the impact tool and you don't submit it to your Just Grants account, you haven't met the requirements for your grant. So make sure you download your PDF. You want to make sure you can log into your Just Grants account or find out who at your agency can do that, and have a plan for getting that submitted before January 30th. If you end up needing help from Just Grants with your account, you want to know that before the due date. There's a very small team of technical assistance providers at the Just Grants agency, and you don't want to wait till January 30th to find out that there's 300 other grantees waiting for 3 staff to call them back that day. So find out sooner rather than later. There are some common impact tool issues because it's a newer tool. We are going to continue to troubleshoot them and hopefully rectify these issues, but better to know ahead of time what to expect. Sometimes the impact site is having trouble loading. The easiest way to go about fixing that is clearing your browser's cache and cookies, which might sound foolish, but I promise this works 90% of the time. Sometimes grantees find that their narrative responses didn't save. This might happen if you exceed character limits. So we strongly encourage you to write your narrative outside of the impact tool first and copy and paste it in. You don't want to have spent an hour writing your narrative and hit save and continue to find that it didn't save and let you continue. So if you type into Word or Pages or whatever documentation source you use, copy and paste in is a lot safer. There are character limits, like I mentioned, and you can see them, I believe, in the sample performance report. But there will also be a pop-up on the page in red text showing you if you've exceeded a character limit. So it shouldn't be a surprise. The last one that seems to haunt folks is the PDF at the very end sometimes randomly generates out of order. The pages are out of order. You'll know right away. If you open your PDF that's downloaded and you don't see the very first page of the report, the general information section, question 1, downloaded funny. We haven't figured out how or why because we can't replicate it, and our tech team hasn't been able to replicate it. There's no rhyme or reason to this glitch yet, and so we are still actively trying to fix it. So what you can do is when you download your PDF at the end of the process, save it to your desktop and open it. Open it to make sure the first page does show what you expected. Your general information section should be right at the front. If for some reason it's not, what you need to do is actually generate a PDF again, which means you would go back to your unique link and click edit the report and then finalize it again, even if you didn't make any changes. It's tedious, but it forces the system to make your PDF again, and hopefully in the right order. A couple of other tips for reporting. and this will apply to everybody, is that you should only be reporting on what the grant funds actually supported during the 6-month reporting period. So you're never reporting on the life of your grant. And if your agency is brand new to having this grant and you didn't draw down grant funds before the end of 2025, you're actually going to click no to almost all of the sections. Anything that's an optional section, if you didn't spend down grant funds, you're going to click no, grant funds were not used for staff, and no, grant funds were used for victim services. So if it's your very first report and you didn't draw down any grant funds in 2025, it's going to be your easiest report ever. We always encourage folks to use narrative questions throughout the report, especially at the end. The narrative section is at the very end of the report, and it will ask you information about your grant goals and activities, any information you would want to share about the data you've reported. We always suggest that if your report doesn't cover, let me rephrase, if your grant funds were not spent for the entire 6-month reporting period, it can be helpful to note in the last narrative question which months your grant funds were used in. So what I mean by that is if your agency is new and you started using grant funds in December of 2025, it would help your OVW program specialist and our team when we analyze your report to make a note in your report saying grant funds were starting to be drawn down in December of 2025. That helps give context to data that is or is not included in the report, especially numerical data. And this last bullet is again plugging that we've got lots of resources on our website, but we're also happy to take your questions one-on-one anytime, phone or email. Our goal is to support you with figuring out how to report what your grant funds were able to support with. Okay. I wanted to take us through specifically the victim services section today because, as I mentioned, the transitional housing performance report has always been difficult for grantees. The format used to be, when it was a fillable PDF, it used to just be confusing. And I've worked on this grant for almost a decade, and I am really hoping that it'll feel more clear going forward. So the victim services section of the report, you can find it in the navigation pane, and it starts with the very first question asking, did you use grant funds to provide victim services or legal services or transitional housing services? If you used your grant funds to support those activities, you're going to indicate yes. You're going to report on any victims who requested and or accepted grant-funded services. And I'm going to pause and bring us back to this and state that most of the victim services data that is requested in this section is congressionally mandated. So you want to make sure you're doing your best to capture this information. And if you don't have a way to capture the information being asked for yet at your agency, you're going to want to make a plan to, or document in the narrative somehow what barriers there are for your agency to report certain information. The other thing that's important here is that despite this section having congressionally mandated data points, OVW wants you to make sure that collecting victim services information is never actually a barrier or a condition for a victim to receive services. So what I mean by that is if your agency is not able to collect detailed demographic information and it's just going to be a barrier, that's okay. And you don't have to collect it. And there are unknown categories throughout the section so that you don't have to collect any specifics from victims especially if it's going to create a barrier to serving those victims. Providing victims with the support that they need is the priority, and OVW knows that, and that data collection should never actually interfere with providing services. Another note that we wanted to highlight here is that confidentiality for victims and survivors is critical. So you're never, ever going to include any personally identifiable information in your performance reports. If you're trying to detail something in the narrative, please do not use people's real names or addresses or any of that information that could link them to your agency or to them. You could make up a fake name if you really wanted to talk about a certain case that was handled that was difficult, or something that you think will be really compelling to help explain the reach and scope of what your grant is doing. But we just want to encourage you to be careful. This is also sometimes really critical in rural areas. If your agency is in a rural area and demographic information could really out a certain part of your community, don't include it and use the unknown category instead. You want to make sure you're always protecting the victims who you're serving. All right, so as I showed you, the victim services section starts with that yes or no question. It's asking if you use grant funds for victim services or legal services or housing or any combination of those things. If you did not use grant funds before December 2025 ended for those activities, you would click no. In order to report a victim or survivor in this section, there are a few key points you want to think about. The victim should have requested or accepted a grant-funded service. The service must be Transitional Housing Program funded. So you're never reporting on services that you referred out for or that were paid for by some other funding stream. And then the last bullet here is making sure that you're only reporting on primary victims that are within the scope of the grant. So domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking are all part of the statute. And you want to make sure that you're not capturing folks here who were not primary victims in that first question asking about primary victims. So the flip side of that is if a victim or survivor is seeking services that are not funded by your OVW program transitional housing grant, you're not going to report on that. If someone refuses all of the services that they are offered, they also should not be reported in the victim services section. And then if you find out that someone was asking for services and that they're actually not a primary victim, you don't want to capture them as a primary victim. These things might sound really basic in this webinar setting, but I promise that we get questions about these topics often. And when you're working through the report and your agency's specific unique circumstances, it can get complicated. So if you ever find yourself unsure of if someone should be reported in the victim services section, you're always welcome to come reach out to MEI for support. All right. So let's see. This question 2, as you can see, is asking about primary victims, which is who I was just discussing. There's a served category, a partially served category, and then it will automatically total. And there's a not served category. There are these very boiled down definitions of how to tell if someone is served, partially served, or not served. And it's less straightforward than you would think. Served means that a victim or survivor received all of the grant-funded services that they requested during the 6-month reporting period. If someone requests things that are not funded by the T housing grant, they're not being captured here, even if they got those services that were funded by some other stream. A victim or survivor is reported as partially served if they requested or accepted more than one transitional housing program funded activity or service, but they only were able to receive some of those grant funded services that they wanted to receive. So if someone requests grant funded victim advocacy and there's a wait list for it because of a full caseload, they don't get to receive that part of the service, but they did receive some other grant funded service like grant funded housing. They're partially served. That status could change on a future reporting period. When they have gone through a 6-month reporting period, receiving everything that they wanted to receive, they'll be reported as served. Someone is reported as not served if they've requested or accepted grant funded services, but they're not able to receive them during the 6-month reporting period. I want to note here that it's really important to capture this data because it helps explain the scope of the violence in the community. It will never reflect poorly on your agency to report people as not served. OVW knows that the grant funds can only reach so far, especially in a field where housing is one of the key needs. This grant program is going towards a very limited resource, as you all are aware. So don't be afraid to indicate that victims requested grant funded housing and were not able to receive it because it couldn't be located. A unit couldn't be located. All of the units are full. Those are all valid reasons and don't reflect badly on your agency. If you do report any victims as partially served or as not served, you're going to be asked to indicate reasons for that status. It's a list of checkboxes, and you can check off any that apply. Sometimes grantees worry that they're going to get in trouble if they are reporting people as not served or partially served. And I promise, and OVW promises, that this question is not punitive. This information and the checkboxes that you indicate help OVW identify trends or areas of need. Like OVW might find that there might need to be statutory changes to help support certain requests. The other thing I'll note is if your agency does use grant funds for housing units, you also will be asked to indicate again later how many victims wanted to receive housing and could not. So that question still exists, but it's going to live after where the housing section starts instead, because it's specific to how grant funds are used. There are some common misconceptions or misunderstandings about how to report someone as partially served and not served. So the quick reminder is that you're always only considering what your agency is grant funded to do, and that the victim has a choice in receiving services. It's really important to consider the choice piece of receiving a service or the choice to refuse a service. If a victim reaches out for information and they don't return, you're not going to report on that victim in the victim services section. Unless they specifically requested a service and they got put on a wait list because it was so full they couldn't be accepted onto it, then they could be reported as not served. But if a victim reaches out and doesn't return, or they withdraw their interest, or they relocate and you lose touch with them because they've stopped engaging, that's the victim's choice to not continue receiving services from the agency. So if they did not partake in any grant funded services, even if they asked about them, they're not going to be reported because they chose not to receive them. That was the same for victim refused services. or could not locate the victim. That indicates that the victim is not actively pursuing receiving your grant funded services. They might have withdrawn their interest. They might have relocated. You might have just lost touch with them because maybe they don't use that phone number anymore. There's a million reasons why you couldn't locate the victim, but that doesn't indicate a reason for partially served or not served. It's not your agency's fault for not being able to locate and provide services to that person. The third one in the list is services not provided by our program. This is a common misconception. You're only going to be considering any services that your agency actually is grant funded to provide, usually either directly paying for it with the Transitional Housing Program grant funds or services that are directly provided by grant funded staff. So if someone comes to your agency asking for legal services and your agency doesn't provide legal services and you make a referral to a local agency that you have worked with and you are going to collaborate with to make sure this victim's needs are met, that's amazing. And you're only going to report on the actual services that your agency is providing using grant funded staff time or money, not the legal services provided by some other agency. Okay. I'm spouting off tons of information at you all, and I hope it's either making sense, or if you're having any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A pod or email us directly. The next thing I'm going to go over here is the demographics. You are only going to capture demographics for primary victims who are reported as served and partially served. So victims who are not served, those are folks who requested grant funded services that didn't get any during the 6 months, and you don't need to report on them anywhere else in the form. But for folks who are served and partially served because they received either all or some of the grant funded services that they wanted to receive, you're going to be asked to report on their race and ethnicity, the victim's sex, and age. For race and ethnicity, some folks want you to identify them as more than one category, and that's great, and please do. And some folks don't want to be identified at all, and because of that, there's an unknown category. And if there's a different race or ethnicity that they want to be captured under, there is an option for another category as well. There must be at least one race or ethnicity indicated per victim who's reported as fully served or partially served. So it can be less than the total people who received services, but you can use the unknown category if you don't have that information. Same goes for the sex category. If you don't have that information or the victim chooses not to disclose it, you don't need to report it. That total can be less than the number of victims served. You can ignore that question piece for any indications from your survivors that you're serving that they don't want to be identified. And for age, there needs to be an exact number, a 1-to-1 ratio, one age per victim who received services. There is an unknown category for age as well. All right. I also wanted to note, because this is the transitional housing program, and some agencies provide services to secondary victims like children and dependents, you're not capturing demographic information for those folks right here. The next thing in the victim services section we wanted to talk about is that reporting on the types of services provided is going to ask you to indicate two different numerical values. So what I mean by that is you're going to be asked how many victims received a particular grant funded service, and then also how many times was that service provided. So there's a 2-column spread for the types of services that your agency might provide. If I pull it up, and I toggle over to it. There we go. So this is the question I'm talking about out loud, where the types of service is going to ask for the number of victims who received that service during the 6-month reporting period, and then the total number of times the service was provided to all of those people. There is still a question on the form asking if your agency is grant funded to provide follow-up support services. This question is geared towards when a victim has exited or completed or been terminated from a transitional housing program unit. So regardless of how the residential component of your programming was funded, anyone can be indicating yes, that they provided grant funded follow-up support services if that's within the scope of your grant. And the setup of that question mirrors the actual question 12 I just showed you, where it'll ask about, let's see, I went to the wrong page, sorry. It'll ask if your grant funds were used for follow-up services, and then a spread of how many victims, children, or dependents received each of the different types of follow-up services, but you're always only reporting on what you're grant funded to do. All right. Question 16 of the victim services section is where you're going to find the legal services subsection. If your agency uses grant funds to pay for attorney or paralegal time, that would be a reason to report in the legal services section. You'd be capturing their grant funded work in a few questions there. And if you don't use your grant funds for those types of staff, you would indicate no. And then that brings us to question 21 of the victim services section. This is where folks are going to find the transitional housing section. And I want to show it to you because this is different than what you saw last July when you were filling out a report, if you filled out a report in July. The questions are still there, but they've been rehomed into the victim services section to fix some validation bugs that we were experiencing with you all last summer. So we've fixed some technical bugs by moving the housing section to be a subsection of the victim services section. So question 21 is the first question of the transitional housing unit section. Did your grant funds support units, whether they were program owned, rented, or vouchers or rent subsidies? And if no, you would click no and skip all of the housing questions. You don't need to see them. But if you did use your grant funds for those things, it's going to unlock the rest of the housing section for you. And you'll fill it out to capture the number of units that you provided with grant funds during the 6 months, the number of accessible units, and this is that number of victims who wanted to receive grant funded housing but could not because there was none available. And then regardless of unit type, you would be reporting in question 25 to capture how many victims, children, and dependents received housing. So if I switch us back over here, I said all of this out loud to you by showing you on the form, but the really big key part of the housing section is that if you use grant funds for housing, you must report in question 25 to indicate the number of bed nights. So I'll say that one more time. Whether or not you had program owned units, program rented units, or vouchers or rent subsidies funded by your T housing grant, you will report in question 25 the number of victims, children, and dependents who received housing, and you'll indicate the number of bed nights they received during the 6-month reporting period. The last handful of questions in the housing section are only applicable for when a victim exits or times out of the residential portion of the program, or if they are terminated for something such as breaking one of the agency rules or program rules. So 26 through 28 will ask you things about the destination upon exit, perception of risk upon exit, and then their total length of stay in a grant funded unit if they exited. Then the last two questions, 29 and 30, are specific for when a victim is forcibly terminated from the residential portion of the program. It'll ask why they were terminated and what their length of stay was when they were terminated. All right. We're doing pretty good on time. And I'm peeking over at the Q&A pod. My colleagues are rapid fire answering questions. Thank you so much, Devin and Chelsea. Okay. So the last section on the report is going to be the narrative section. There are narrative boxes throughout the whole form though. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, your narrative data is important. It's going to be read by your program specialist. It's going to give context to the numbers that you've reported. Numbers don't tell a story. So anything that you can detail out in narrative is only going to help your OVW program specialist or program manager better understand what's going on for you and your agency and your community. You might even end up quoted in some reports for Congress because grantee reports that are submitted are often quoted. So the final section of the whole form is going to ask for things like the status of your grant goals and objectives, and that is always going to be mandatory. It's going to ask you about areas of remaining need, and that question is mandatory when you fill out the report in July to capture data for a January through June reporting period. So that means that question's not required when you're filling out a report this January, but it's strongly encouraged. Same goes for the next one, where it'll ask you about what your grant funds allowed your agency to do. That question will be considered mandatory when you fill out the report in July to capture January through June information. But this January, you're capturing information about July through December of 2025. So that's another question that's not considered mandatory right now. There's a narrative question asking about lessons learned regarding effective approaches to project implementation. And it is required if you're completing your final report because you're closing out your grant funds. There's an additional information on effectiveness question. It's strongly encouraged and not required. Same with the very last question, which will ask if there are any additional relevant information about the data you're submitting. This very last question is the one where we often suggest to grantees to indicate if you have multiple grant award reports, such as closing out a report and opening a new one for a new award. You could indicate that your grant funds started in December 2025, or that your grant funds ended during the reporting period. So maybe your grant funds you're only reporting on July through October of 2025. Any information about which months you're reporting on is only going to help the folks that review your report. You can also write about things like anything that you might have previously been reporting on, but no longer will. Like maybe one of your grant goals and objectives was completed or fumbling over an example. Just give up on it. If you have any questions about what to include in your narrative, always feel free to reach out. And consider that your narrative is going to support your program manager with understanding what you do. So brag about your agency, brag about your staff. The work you're doing is amazing. Filling out the reports doesn't feel amazing, but it is impactful. I'm going to go through some contact information now. So I am done with actual form content at this point. But if you have any questions, keep throwing them our way. So on the screen right now is information about contacting Just Grants. If you have questions about accessing your account or trying to submit something into your Just Grants account, we cannot help you at MEI. You'll want to contact OVW's support line for Just Grants directly. So there's their phone number and email address on our screen here. If you don't have it or don't copy it down today, but you need it at a later date, we can also provide it to you another time. If you have questions about what your grant funds are allowed to do, like what activities are supported, or if you need approval for something, that's something that you have to ask your OVW grant manager about. We don't have access to what your grant goals and objectives are. So if you need to amend those or find out what they are because you're taking over for someone who left your agency, you're going to want to be reaching out and be in contact with your OVW grant manager. Another important note here is that if for some reason your agency is going to be unable to meet the due date for your performance report, you want to reach out to your program manager to discuss that. One of the consequences of not submitting a report on time is that your grant funds can end up frozen. We don't want that to happen to you. We always strongly encourage folks to try to submit their reports before the due date in case there's any hiccups, and that way you'll have a couple of days to spare to get it worked out. And then the information on the screen here now is for our agency, VAWA Measuring Effectiveness Initiative, or MEI, or Muskie, if that's something that your agency calls us still. If you need help with any technical or logistical issues using the impact tool, if you have questions about the content of the reporting form itself, or questions about how to calculate FTEs, or which category to report victims in, anytime you have questions about what's on the form, that's us. And you can reach out for one-on-one support over email or phone. If you need to Zoom and screen share because something's nuts on your screen when you're looking at the form, we can do that. So please feel free to reach out any time of year. We are located in Maine on the East Coast. And I say that because if you're reaching out from a different time zone and you're trying to schedule with us, it's always helpful if you tell us what time zone you're in or what state you're in or both, so that we make sure we don't miss each other due to a scheduling confusion. All right, I'm going to leave our information up on the screen. That's essentially my last slide. The last slide truly says, do you have any questions? But we're just gonna be here answering questions. So if you have any, now is your time. Could the contact information be pasted? Oh yes, great question. Another thing I'm gonna show you in relation to that question, if you were to go to our website, the transitional housing page, this isn't quite it. Where is it? Oh, this one. You'll be able to download today's slides from our website. So we are going to be posting a recording of the training, and you can download the slides in English or Spanish anytime right from our website. There's also other resources you can download, but as I mentioned, if you were to lose contact information for any of either us or Just Grants or your OVW program manager, we can help you with that. Another cool thing on our website, you can contact us right from our website using our fillable form here. Just tell us what your name is and your email and your phone. You can select that you're a transitional housing program grantee right from the dropdown, and you can either ask your question directly or ask for scheduled technical support. And it will help us if you tell us what time zone you're in. All right. I will answer this question out loud. Tony's asking, in the past on different grants, MEI has shared some great examples of how to respond to narrative questions and how to word things. And can we do that for the transitional housing question or grant as well? I'm going to just take a peek and see what we've got posted. And I think one of my colleagues might also be typing. We in the past have done a narrative training. I don't think we're doing that this time, but I'm happy to search around and see what we've got. I think the key with narrative is that you want to explain how your grant funds are being used and highlight successes. You can think of it as a before and after impact story. So if your agency couldn't provide housing units prior to receiving the funding and this opened the door for your agency, that's a before and after. If you couldn't find a victim advocate and you needed an extra one on staff, and this is the type of grant that made that possible, that's the before and after story. All right. I do not remember if we have any narrative examples posted anymore. Do any of my colleagues on this call happen to know if we have any still posted?
We actually removed it and
Okay,
stopped all of our narrative. We used to do a whole training on narrative coaching, and we stopped doing that a couple years ago.
thanks, Devin.
Yeah.
There are some good examples in the instructions, which I can
Thanks,
put in the chat.
Chelsea. The instructions are in one of the downloadable squares here. So if you were to go to the instructions, let's see, I'm just going to start at the bottom. All right, so the instructions themselves have some bulleted examples of what you might write. If that is helpful to anybody, I can post that in the somewhere. Where can I post that? In the chat? Sure, in the chat. Throwing a link to the instructions for the form right into the chat for everyone to access. Sam is asking, when we mentioned indicating the time zone, was that for any time we submit a request to VOW MEI? Great question. I would say if you're going to detail out your question and you're looking for a response over email, you don't need to tell us the time zone. If you're trying to schedule a time that we call you, if you can tell us the time zone, that would help so that we make sure we call you at the time you're expecting. Another question about narrative. Okay. Yeah, I think the best examples that are written that we can share with you are the narrative examples written in the instructions that I've linked to. Okay. What else can I show you all? Check back at the chat. Devin or Chelsea, do you have anything else you would suggest I show folks that are still logged in?
Maybe just show where the webinars get posted, since we've
Sure.
had a couple folks asking about that. There's
Thank
a link that looks like it will already be, it'll be what they get added to, so to speak. Trying to re-find it. Yeah, okay. It's the third one back that Chelsea put in the chat. I can put it in the chat. You're already
Okay.
there, I think. Oh, wait, never mind. Here, I'll put it in the chat. Sorry. It specifically says coming soon, our recording, and that's where it will go.
Okay. Here, I'll put that over here. All right, so this is what that link will look like if you click it. And for right now, this is the same link I mentioned earlier that you can download the slides for today. And soon we'll have the actual recording posted too. But since we're currently in the recording, it's not posted yet.
Casey, I'm sure that you're going to check back to it, but we got a question to revisit the bit about the number of individuals served versus the number of times service was provided.
Can do. Thank you for flagging it. All right, let's see. I'm going to switch us back over here to this one. Okay, so someone's asking, can we revisit the bit about the number of individuals served versus the number of times the service was provided? If someone receives services in a group setting, do we count it as separate instances? Interesting question. All right, let me pull up the form. Thank you for being so patient with me as I toggle between a bunch of things. Where did I save the form? Here it is. This one. There we go. All right, so it's this question, number 12, victim services. So if you, for example, have 3 victims, you can see I'm getting an instant validation issue because I haven't filled out any other questions on the form. But let's pretend anyways that 3 is not a great number. How about we've got 7 people in a support group setting and they each received that service. So that's a total of 7 times as a base number. If that group met every month for the whole 6-month reporting period, we're going to be reporting on every time those people attended. So if they all attended all 6, it'll be 7 times 6. And what is that, 42? Do I know math? I don't know math. I use a calculator for everything, so this is humiliating. Wonderful. But the boiled down answer is, you can see here there is a validation requirement that you must report number of services times at least once for each person over here. So if I were to report the group only met 1 time and it was for 7 people, it's going to give me an error. Instead, think of it as how many times did each person receive the service, not how many times did that group service setting happen. I hope that example helps answer your question, despite me butchering some math on a live webinar. Let's see. We've got 77 folks logged in still. Well, a little less, 71. I have no other content to share with you all today, but I'm happy to take questions. I'm so appreciative of your patience and your time today, and I hope the reporting goes as smoothly as it can for you. All right. Oh, yes. Okay, so there's a question that just came in. Can I re-explain this group setting question? Absolutely. So it's a group setting, and in your question, you said if the group was held weekly, but not all 7 attendees attended each week, the number may not be 42. That is correct. So you'd want to have one important thing about your data is you always want to have source documentation. And that means if you have grant funded group setting services, probably have an attendance sheet so that you know how many times that service was rendered during the 6 months. So you don't like, there's not a place here to indicate that one victim attended 7 times and a second victim attended 5 times, but you want to have that total for the 6 month reporting period. And maybe it ends up being something closer to like 25 because attendance for these 7 folks is choppy. Yeah, I hope that helps answer your question. But the general boiled down way to think of these 2 columns is how many unique humans received that service during the 6 month reporting period, and then a total number of times each of those people received the service. All right, attendees are dropping off. We're down to 44. If anyone has questions, feel free to either email us directly or give us a call. Happy to chat about any specific questions too. If you have something that's a little more nuanced, sometimes that's easier offline outside of a webinar setting. All right. I don't see any more questions coming in. So I think I will end with a big thank you to our hosts today. Thank you for the tech intro and support, Anna, and for our closed captioner, for your patience with me as I bumbled through some sentences. And thank you all for your patience and time today. And I hope you have a good rest of your, today, Tuesday? I think we're all set to close out the webinar.